Novels are a lot like baby birds about to fly from the nest. Some of them take that first leap, flap their wings, and soar majestically to new heights. Others flap their wings, but despite their best efforts, they cannot overcome gravity and so plummet directly down to earth. Sometimes you write a novel and it just doesn't turn out. Despite your best hopes, you've not created a great novel, you've created a bad novel. But fear not, for there is always the opportunity to go back and repair the damage that has been done so that your novel flies majestically through the sky rather than crashing abruptly into the ground. Today, I'm going to share with you 5 pervasive issues that could turn a good novel into a bad novel. This list is by no means exhaustive, but I think it highlights some of the systemic problems that might be present in a lackluster manuscript. Alright, sign number 1 that you've written a poor novel: much of the writing lacks intention. Short story and flash fiction writers talk a lot about the difficulties surrounding getting all of their story into the short length of their mediums. You don't hear novelists talking about that as much, but it would behoove many novelists to start having similar conversations. There's this feeling with a novel that I think a lot of people have, that you have room, that because a novel is so long, you don't need to worry about cramming things in. And that idea is fundamentally wrong. Novels aren't about telling a longer story, they're about telling a bigger story. You should be able to haul out every scene, every dialogue exchange, and every description from your novel and explain why the hell it's in there. If you have a scene with a character walking to and sitting down at a table, it needs a reason to be there. You have to be able to defend it. What does this scene show us? Are they nervous about the conversation that's about to take place? Are they limping because their old war wound is acting up? Is the paint on the chair peeling and faded like all the possessions in your character's poverty-stricken existence? There is no room in a novel for fluff, whether it's action, dialogue, description, narrative, whatever. It needs to go if it doesn't belong. Bad novels tell a 30,000 word story in 80,000 words. Good novels use every word. Make sure that you're telling a novel length story, and the only way to do that is if every part of your writing has a purpose, has a reason to be there. Next up, sign number 2 that you've written a poor novel: your writing can't stand on its own. A lot of in-person critique groups are set up where the person doing the critique will read their findings, and then the person who's getting critiqued can thank them and show appreciation, but can't respond in any way to what was said in the critique. This is done for a couple reasons. One is just to avoid drama and people getting into debates and shouting matches and that sort of thing. But the other reason is that it enforces the fact that your writing must stand on its own. You are not going to be able to be over your reader's shoulder, able to explain why characters did what they did or to provide additional reasons for why something happened the way it did. All of that needs to be conveyed in your writing. Now, this issue can be caused by any number of problems in the writing. It might be poor descriptions that aren't getting details across. You might be putting the reader's attention to the wrong things. You might be subtly hinting at something that is too subtle. As I said, it's more of a symptom than an actual problem, and really something that you can only discover through critique. Part of this is also a responsibility issue. The writers who lash out at a critique partner who just doesn't get it or who doesn't appreciate their work are displaying a really unprofessional attitude. Your job as the writer is to make the reader understand your point. If your work doesn't do that, then that's a commentary on you. That's a shortcoming that you need to overcome, not something that anyone else needs to overcome. If your novel can only hold up when you are there to defend it, then it isn't a good novel. Next up, sign number 3 that you've written a poor novel: writing that has an excessive amount of complexity. Complexity is the amount of work the reader needs to do in order to experience the narrative impact of your story. The number of characters they need to know, the number of plot threads they need to keep track of, the number of made-up gods they need to pronounce the name of, all of those things contribute to the complexity of your novel. A fight scene with two characters fighting requires the reader to track two characters. A fight scene with 10 characters is more complex because there's more for the reader to track. You need a certain amount of complexity for a story to be enjoyable. You can have incredibly simple stories that are enjoyable, but bigger, more epic narratives require more characters, more plot, and more intricate settings, all of which brings in complexity. The problem comes in when people add in complexity thinking that complexity alone will make their story better. Just adding more stuff to a novel is rarely the answer. All the complexity in your story needs to come along with depth. Depth creates a sense of intrigue and curiosity and arises out of the themes and meaning associated with your story. This relates back to point number 1 and intention and purpose. Adding in a bunch of complexity often comes without any purpose. Good novels maximize depth while minimizing the complexity that the reader needs to wade through. Bad novels throw as much complexity at the reader as they can while hoping to produce something interesting. Next up is inconsistent or poorly thought out narrative distance. Narrative distance is essentially how inside the head of the characters we are. A very far narrative distance means that we don't even know the names of the characters. We're just sort of a drone hovering over events as the story is being told. This is more objective and impersonal. We aren't connected to the characters in any meaningful way. At close narrative distances, we can read the minds and see all the inner thoughts and feelings of the characters, including their backstories and all the associated information. Here, the narration becomes more emotional. We feel more of what the characters are feeling. We are more connected to the characters. A far narrative distance and a close narrative distance can both work. They are both valid decisions. Narrative distance can make a novel seem more cinematic or more emotional. It can make the story feel more plot or character driven. It's all about what you want to achieve with the specific novel. If you haven't given the narrative distance much thought, then your novel likely has a random narrative distance that might not be serving the story. It might work out okay, but it also might not. Another issue here is inconsistency, at least without intention. You can get a lot of mileage out of varying narrative distance throughout the story, but you need to do it on purpose. If we just randomly move between objective and emotional prose, it may feel a bit jarring. Narrative distance should either be consistent throughout the story, or it should change for specific reasons to achieve a specific feeling in the reader. Good novels use narrative distance to their advantage. Bad novels just sort of leave it up to chance. And finally, the last sign that you wrote a bad novel: the story lacks structure. I'm not normally a huge fan of plot structures, things like the 7-point story structure, the 3-act structure, Freytag's tetrahedron or whatever it's called. I've just never found them to be that useful for me, and I always find that you can make any story pretty much fit into a lot of different plot structures, so I just don't see a lot of point in using them. All that being said, a good novel needs to have structure and not just at the overall plot level. Good novels manage the intensity and tension of the story, raising and lowering and ebbing and flowing it deliberately across the entire arc of the story. There is a complex interplay between when information gets revealed, how conflicts build and resolve. All of this needs to be properly managed, and this is where plot structures are sometimes helpful. One thing I do like about plot structures is they illustrate what should happen in what order and at what parts of your story. While there's no one-size-fits-all approach here, just understanding why you do something at a specific point can be really valuable. Also remember that you need chapter and scene level structure as well as overall novel structure. Novels aren't generally read in one sitting, so you can't just rely on the overall story to keep readers engaged. You want to ensure that every chapter or every scene has some sort of an arc, some sort of conflict, that you're giving the characters some kind of goal that they're working towards, that they're solving, that they're making progress at every point in the story. I don't think you need to go quite to the level where like every chapter is a short story, but a lot of your chapters should have some kind of structure, some kind of narrative arc that fits within the broader narrative arc of the overall novel. Bad novels lack structure and just sort of have stuff happen when it happens. They establish some characters and a conflict, and then we sit around through the middle of the novel until we get to the end where we have the climax and everything gets resolved. Don't do that. Make sure that your novel has structure throughout. This will keep the reader engaged and will keep them interested. Just like I hope you were interested in this video. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video and found the advice in it useful. If you want to see more stuff like this, you can check out all my other writing advice related videos and subscribe to my channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.